This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. K-State grain economist Daniel O'Brien begins today's show by discussing the upcoming USDA grain stock report and small grains report expectations, as well as a positive outlook for corn exports. The show continues with David Renter, director of the Center for Outcomes Research and Epidemiology at K-State, as he explains research he and his team have done looking into treatment choices for bovine respiratory disease. Chip Redmond, K-State meteorologist, wraps up today's show with his weather forecast, where he expects warmer than normal temperatures and steady weather. That and more is coming up ahead.
You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we begin Friday's show with a grain market update from Kansas State University grain economist Daniel O'Brien as he covers the upcoming USDA reports that will be released on Tuesday. Daniel, thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much, Chevy.
Can you talk about the upcoming USDA grain reports?
Yes. So, on Tuesday, September the 30th, USDA will come out with its grain stocks report and the annual small grain summary report. The annual small grain summary report for Kansas will mainly deal with, of course, wheat, hard red winter wheat, but there's a large amount of, we're covering all the different classes in that also. The main focus of the report, I think, will be with the grain stocks report. And out of that, the biggest crop amongst corn, soybeans, grain, sorghum, and wheat, that where we would see an impact probably be the corn. We look to these grain stocks reports to give us some idea of what stocks are. We have a pretty good idea of what ethanol usage is for these crops, what exports are. We have other weekly reports that measure those almost daily. The one category we really don't have a good measure on, because USDA has a very difficult time actually surveying this, would be feed usage. So we take these quarterly stocks reports, we back out what the other uses are, and then figure out, well, how much is left over for feed use. And that's largely what we're doing for corn. We have that to some degree also in grain sorghum, and especially for sorghum, again, then a lot of that's Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma issue anymore, given where we grow that and where those markets are. This very, very slow exports for sorghum. We're really, really focused on what the usage of sorghum is anticipated to be for feed usage, and also really it's kind of surging of late, grain sorghum usage for ethanol production too. So watching that, and also you'll see this residual calculation, again, quarter to quarter, be the June 1st number to the September 1st number for the June, July, August timeframe. We'll be looking also at estimates of wheat feeding that have gone on. And, we've had low enough wheat prices that it's not out of the realm of possibility that we could afford in cattle feeding areas to actually feed some wheat. So we'll see where that goes. I guess I would say that the expectations for this report on the grain stock side are almost for absolutely no changes, which means if there are any changes, then the market could move. The average trade estimate for grain stocks, corn stocks, is at 1.337 billion bushels, and that number now that'll match up with the August 31st September figure for the corn supply demand balance sheet for the ending stocks for the last marketing year that ended August 31st. So the market's expecting just a little bit more in ending stocks than what USDA had indicated it expected for the 2024-25 marketing year than what they had said on that September WASDE report of 1.325. So I got a little bit of sway in terms of where that market might end up at. Of course, the stocks figure for that last marketing year way lower than we were a year earlier than on this same date. So when we finished up the 2023-24 marketing year, we were at 1.763 billion bushels, and now we're somewhere around 1.3 or so. So, Chevy, if we didn't have humongous crops coming on for corn, then we'd be in a pretty tight supply-demand situation. But the large crop, again, 16 plus billion bushels, had just sort of overwhelmed the tightness of the old crop marketing year. So that's just the case. Small changes expected for soybeans. Also, the average trade estimate about 323 million bushels for the ending stocks. Essentially, the ending stocks figures that for the 24-25 marketing year. In the September WASDE report, the projection was for 300 million. So here, just for corn, so goes soybeans in that there's about a 25 million bushel increase expected in ending stocks from what had been stated in that September 12th WASDE report. So anyway, I don't know that 25 million bushels are going to change the outcome a lot on the markets if the trade's right or wrong, but at least that's something to watch, and could be a small supportive positive if we have anything different than what the USDA had said in that last WASDE report, by i.e. 15, 20, 25 million bushels more. And then for wheat, the average trade estimate for grain stocks, of course, we're not looking at end of the year or beginning of the year mark stocks. We're looking at, again, June 1 was the June 1 stocks represented the beginning of the marketing year. Now we're anticipating about just a little bit over 2 billion bushels of ending stocks. And that's within the trade range of about 2.1 to 1.995 something. So you got that. Now, kind of also buried within this, by the time the USDA gets a year out from where they were a year ago from the in terms of last year's crop, they'll start to back calculate and figure that, well, gosh, if something is wrong here, and we think we have a pretty good handle on all these numbers, it drives them to go back and look at the size of last year's crop. And really, if there's anything that's kind of a after the fact surprise, it would be that the USDA could come back in and figure out that, well, gosh, we over or underestimated the 2024 corn or soybean crop by some appreciable manner. And I think you can throw grain sorghum in on that, any surprises. So right now, at least by my estimate, by the pre-trade estimates, really no expectation of change at all for soybeans in the 2024 crop numbers. But there is some anticipation that the corn crop will be looks like about 15 to 18 million bushels higher than 15 to 18,000 billion bushels, just a little bit higher estimate of an adjustment higher for last year's crop. So you got that as it is. So I think the best thing to say for the stock side of this and last year's crop all thrown together is that there's expectation of minimal change. So with that, if we do get anything that's appreciable, instead of 25 million bushels, we'll say 50 million differentials from what's expected, then there's potential for volatility, particularly to the upside if we're short on stocks. If it's equal to or larger supplies, I don't know how much lower prices will go. That would be my thought. And then also would figure for we'll also have that small grains summary report that comes out, the annual number representing what we have on September the 1st. And again, I almost to the decimal point, we're anticipating no changes from what the USDA had recently said, which means there's some risk of changes that may come on if we get anything other than just the standard rote repeat of previous numbers. So we'll be watching that for wheat. We'll watch most closely the hard red winter wheat crop size figure. Here we got for the average trade estimate is 768 million bushels for hard red winter wheat for 2025. The trade in that come out of the September NASS report, anticipating just that or just slightly higher. So we'll be watching that, and it's these sleeper issues that come in that we're surprised by that can cause the markets to move around. So come 11 o'clock on Tuesday the 30th, we'll be watching closely to see if any issues come up that are a surprise.
And Daniel, there's been some positive discussion around exports.
Yes, we continue to see pretty strong U.S. corn exports. Here for the week ending September the 18th, I had just about 52 million bushels of actual shipments occur. We need a pace of about 57, 58 to meet the USDA's record high projection of 2.975 billion bushels, but still over 50 at this time of year is pretty strong. We have seen some grain sorghum movement, 1.2 million bushels, which is strongly higher than where we had been here in recent weeks with sorghum. Probably the biggest surprise would be that what we've seen on wheat exports. Again, we have nothing to brag about at all in terms of the strength of wheat prices, yet we have the strong movement, a lot of it hard red. For hard red winter wheat, for the week ending September the 18th, we had just under 12 million bushels of movement of actual sales, need about 5.6 to meet the USDA's projection. So right now, hard red winter wheat exports in the grain markets are leading the way. And I'm sure farmers wish they had a higher price, but anything we can clean out now out of our domestic supplies makes more room for later when we can hopefully see prices recover.
Daniel, thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Again, that was Kansas State University grain economist Daniel O'Brien with this week's grain market update as he discussed the upcoming United States Department of Agriculture reports, including the grain stocks and small grains report, which will be released September 30th. If you're interested in learning more about these kinds of topics, you can check out Daniel O'Brien on AgManager.info. Again, that is Daniel O'Brien on AgManager.info. I will be sure to link this resource in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll have more for you up ahead on this episode of Agriculture Today.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show with Professor and Director of the Center for Outcomes Research and Epidemiology in K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine, David Renter. David, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
David, you recently just presented at K-State's Beef Stalker Field Day in your topic presentation titled Making Treatment Choices for Reducing BRD and Death Loss. And why is this research you did on this topic something you found important?
Well, as a veterinarian, we're always looking for ways to improve animal health, and particularly the state of the industry right now. It's really important to look at, how can we get more animals across the finish line, as they say, in terms of getting it through the sickness and death loss period and on through to providing safe, wholesome beef.
And through this research, not here to make recommendations, but really just to learn more information.
Right. And actually that's sort of the mission of our center is to provide good quality information to decision makers. And in this case, that would be veterinarians and beef producers.
How many different trials did you do to find the research or conclusions from your work?
Well, I talked today about 3 different BRD treatment trials, bovine respiratory disease, that is, that were done in collaboration with veterinarians and producers in the field. Those have been done over the last couple years, and wanted to summarize that for the audience here today.
And taking a quick walk through those 3 different trials. First off, one starting that would be kind of considered the stepping stone in Texas. What were you looking at?
Right. So the main question there was, in this type of calf that we considered fairly high risk for bovine respiratory disease, if they receive a metaphylaxis antimicrobial when they arrive, which in this case was Draxxin was what was used, then those that subsequently become sick with BRD, should we treat them with a similar drug or something that's a little bit different? And that was kind of the impetus of that first one.
And what did you see from whether that should be the same drug or a different one?
What we found in that study was that really we didn't see any significant difference in subsequent health events, whether that's continued sickness or death loss. There wasn't anything significantly different between the 2 treatment groups. in that study.
And how did you distinguish those cattle as high risk?
Actually, that was the producer and the veterinarian. They have a history and data in their database based on the same type of cattle, source, weight, etc., that they fit the definition of what they considered high risk.
How did you distinguish that it was time to make that second treatment for BRD?
Yeah, so in all these studies, we relied closely with the consulting veterinarian and the producer and followed their standard of practice, if you will. And they were all fairly similar in that the pen rider or cowboy identified the animal in the pen. They didn't look right? They looked sick. They were brought up to the chute. They had a rectal temperature. They received a clinical score, and they fit the case definition. Then they were enrolled into one of the two treatments.
And what was the second study you did on this?
So the second study was really meant to be a repeat of the first one in a slightly different population. The first study, we actually didn't see as much death loss as what they expected based on their historical records, and so the second study was a little bit different animals but also high risk. The only difference between those studies is then there was a third treatment evaluated. So this had the same two treatments as the first study plus a third one, and it was a little bit bigger study because we had now 3 treatment groups instead of 2.
Did having those 3 treatment groups make a difference, or what did you see from that?
So the big thing that we saw from that study was that the one treatment group had significantly less mortality, subsequent mortality, than the other 2 treatment groups. And the other things that we looked at in terms of retreatments and chronicity, none of those were different amongst the groups, but the death loss was different.
So what did you conclude from that study?
So our conclusion from that study, and it's always important to put it in context of the study population, which is one of the things that I reemphasized in my presentation today, is what we see in these treatment studies. You tend to get different responses if they're done with different types of cattle. So we put it in context of the type of cattle that was in that second study, that these 600-pound high-risk commingled steers and heifers that had a fairly high disease burden. About 12% of the cases subsequently died. So fairly high disease burden. That Resflor treatment was significantly better than the other 2 treatments in terms of reducing mortality.
And what was that third study you did?
So the third study was done with, again, a different study population. So these weren't high-risk animals. These were 700-pound, we called them medium risk, or the producer called them medium risk. Didn't expect quite as much BRD as what we would expect in high-risk animals. And so they didn't receive metaphylaxis, unlike the other 2 studies. So that was part of the driver of that third study is, okay, we looked at a couple populations after receiving metaphylaxis, what treatment to use. In this one, it was without metaphylaxis up front and a medium risk animal. How do these 3 treatment protocols compare to each other?
And how did they compare?
They were very, very similar. The statistical answer would be that we didn't find any evidence for any significant differences in any health outcomes that we looked at, whether they were retreated, whether they became chronic, whether they died. None of those things were statistically significant, different amongst any of the 3 treatment groups.
So what's your overall conclusion summary from this work you've done with these 3 studies?
I think these 3 studies illustrate what we've seen beyond these 3 studies, in that there have been, BRD is a big issue, so there have been a lot of different trials about what's the best treatment, and we don't always get a consistent answer, and that's what we found in these 3 studies, and part of that is we have a lot of variability in the type of cattle that we bring into a background or a feedlot situation. Some are high risk, some are not, some are lightweight, some are yearlings. And so part of that is, I think is to strongly emphasize that you need to look at your cattle population and again, these are prescription medications. So the producers need to work with their veterinarian. Legally, it's required, but also the veterinarian probably has access to some of these studies that we've done and others have done, and the answer to what's the best treatment is going to depend on their situation.
So for producers who are thinking about this, another part of your presentation talked about, is it worth it financially to do it? And what did you see, or what have you guys looked into financially, if it's worth intervening into cattle's health?
Yeah, so the motivation for that second part of the presentation was basically around the question of, if there's something that can reduce death loss, what does it cost, and is it worth it from an economic standpoint? Now, there are other values in terms of animal welfare and things you need to consider, but we've asked that question for years because we want to try to reduce death loss, but it's become even more of an issue economically now when calves are worth much more than they were even a year ago, let alone 5 years ago. And so the answer to does it pay to do X, Y, or Z has changed recently.
So that number is not always static and is often variable?
Yeah, it is variable, and there's a number of factors that come in. I already mentioned the price changes that we've seen over time of cattle. There's also, what's the cost of the intervention, whether that's a drug or a feed additive or if husbandry change that's going to cost something. But just like I mentioned a minute ago with the BRD studied population issue, that comes into play here too, is if you can reduce death loss by a half, let's say, a half of what? That's where you need to consider on a case by case basis, what are the type of cattle that you have and are expecting your death loss to be, because cutting a big number in half leads to a big number, cutting a really small number in half, not so much.
If people want to find more information on that or are looking to see, is it worth it for my operation, is there a tool available?
Yeah, so that last part, the death loss evaluation cost effectiveness, is now on the AgManager website, and there's a spreadsheet calculator that somebody can work through and look at different scenarios, and there's also some instruction there on how to use it, and importantly, contact information for the people that built it. So if you need help, you can get a hold of them.
David, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
All right, thank you.
That was Professor and Director of the Center for Outcomes Research and Epidemiology in K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine, David Renter. I will link that decision tool in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Friday show with a weather update from K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thanks for joining us this week.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Chip, what weather have we been seeing this past week?
Well, another wet week for the most part for the state of Kansas and really the Central Plains. We saw a slow-moving storm system push through Sunday through Tuesday, and that led to several rounds of showers and storms across especially central and eastern parts of the state, where obviously the central didn't need it very much, but the east definitely needed it, and they'd gone quite some time without a good amount of rain. And we had totals up to 2.5, 3 inches of rain in places in central Kansas especially. And this is, keep in mind, we're in that downward swing where we should be drying out going into the winter. And we are climatologically, but we're not meteorologically. We've definitely seen a lot of rain. But then we saw a little bit of severe weather with it, with some gusty winds and some small hail. After that, though, precipitation moved out and things really settled down midweek. And the front that was associated with that system scoured out all that moisture, pushed it off to our south and east, and things finally dried out a little bit and definitely felt a little bit more fall-like. But we still have warmer than normal temperatures, even when we think fall. The coolest day that we saw this week was on Thursday morning. We had western Kansas dip down into the 40s. Most of the state has seen some glimpse of a 40-degree reading, except for the far southeast thus far this fall. But overall, it's been warmer than normal. And even those areas that did see 40s this week, that's kind of climatological average for them, where average lows and highs are falling about a degree a day as we go through the next several weeks.
Are we going to continue to be dry as we look forward?
The good news is that system pushed all that moisture off to the south and east. It allowed high pressure to build in, and now high pressure is dominating across the central U.S. And looking at the forecast models out the next 7 days, there's not a drop of moisture to be found in the plains, which is a relief for a lot of folks who are, I know, itching to get in the field and start harvest and hoping to dry things out a little bit. Temperatures going to be running a little bit warmer than normal, about 5-6 degrees above normal, both on highs and lows. Might even see some 90 degrees in western Kansas this weekend. And that should help really move things along the dry. We won't have a lot of wind, but this high pressure is going to get reinforced by tropical activity, especially in the southeast. In the Atlantic, there's 2 hurricanes that are likely to form over the weekend, not far from each other, with maybe even some U.S. impact by early next week. That's going to help reinforce that high pressure and makes predicting beyond the next week a little bit more challenging. What will likely happen is those hurricanes will reinforce the high and keep us persistent with warmer than normal temperatures and likely keep us on the dry side into maybe even mid-October. There are a couple of models that have those storms steering off into the ocean, and as a result would allow that high to shift and kind of let another push of moisture come in early October. So right now I don't think that's going to happen, but really we kind of transition and focus on that first weekend of October. Looks like when we might have a pattern change to bring cooler weather, at least. Precipitation, like I mentioned, is a little bit more uncertain and focuses more on temperature for that system the first weekend of October. And the probabilities and predictability of rain is definitely more uncertain.
So, Chip, are we going for some places in Kansas have had too much rain to going to dry out and have drought problems?
You know, this time of year, as our average precipitation decreases, and we still have drought in the state of Kansas. We can't ignore that. We still have D1 drought. In fact, we saw expansion of D1 drought in northeast Kansas this week. And then we still have drought persisting along the Missouri border as well. And I don't see those going away. But overall, we could be dry for a couple of weeks, and especially parts of like central Kansas could probably dry for the next 2 months and not have drought. And keep in mind the drying potential of the atmosphere is much less this time of year. We don't have as much heat. Days are getting shorter, so we don't lose as much moisture from the ground. And then the vegetation is starting to go into dormancy as well. Some of the vegetation depends on the day length. And so overall moisture demand is just less. And so it becomes harder to develop drought. We kind of transition into the winter season where we don't see drought come and go as much. And the changes become more gradual over time instead of rapid and fluctuating.
Chip, I appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having me.
That was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. That's all we have for you this week on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you on Monday.